Good evening, one and all present over here. So my name is Durga Prasad. I came from, I'm actually from Andhra Pradesh and I am staying in Baroda right now. So it's a privilege to talk about being an artist, and I'm talking about legendary artists like Tyeb Mehta. Like my title is about falling figures and fragmented histories, revisiting Tyeb Mehta's critical practice on his sanitary. Like the word, if you refer like Tyeb is more commonly spelled Tyeb, is originally is an Arabic word that literally means good and pleasant, kind, pure and righteous. Like the Tyeb Mehta refers to a well-known Indian artist, as you all know. Like the above mentioned synonymous like exactly suits if you do research about Tyeb Mehta. Like he's actually personally those words suits Tyeb Mehta's personality as an artist as well as human beings. Like first of all, I'm taking this paper presentation very personally as an artist. Like while this paper to presenting this paper, like I told to my friends, colleagues there in the Baroda, like so they are talking on my back like ab ye kya likhega Tyeb Mehta ke. So like it is completely agree, like there is nothing to write new about a legendary artist like him, because so many art critics and art writers, senior readers and writers already wrote many things about Tyeb Mehta. So he's a kind of legendary artist. So being an artist, like writing about an artist, like knowing more about artistic temperaments and sensitivities. Like Tyeb is always my personal favorite Indian artist of all time, from my bachelor's to right now. Like while writing this paper, I have questioned that because I'm not actually a writer, like I'm an artist, so you need to forgive me for my bad writing, formatting, this and all. So like while I'm addressing, like I have a question that to whom I'm addressing this paper, like so I got a clarification while in between writing, like so I can address these into a new generation of young artists who's coming up. Like so Tyeb is a legendary artist born in 1925, and actually this year we are celebrating 100 years of Tyeb Mehta. Like there are more activities going on his birthday, like on his completing 100 years, Mumbai Art Weekend, like Art Mumbai, they're all KNMA are celebrating Tyeb Mehta's retrospective as well. Like so there is a word nowadays trending like local. It is about global and being a local and becoming global. Like it exactly suits Tyeb Mehta's language, if you see. Like so Tyeb Mehta stands as one of the most influential figures in modern Indian art, known for his powerful visual language that fuses Indian themes with modern aesthetics, which I said local. Like so approach into artwork and academic unconventional drawings and lithographs and never seen sculptures. I divided my writing into 4 different chapters. Like so here I am talking about non-academic unconventional drawings. Like if you see Michelangelo drawing, they are like very academic drawing, like as a very perfection is there. Like if you see Tyeb Mehta's drawing, there is no certain kind of academic drawing in it. Like it's a very childish approach in it, like and very powerful as well. Like so in
this you have already spoken.
Yeah. Actually. So Tyeb Mehta, one of India's most influential modernists, and was a pioneer whose vision and discipline has gave for the generation of contemporary artists. This paper explores his artistic evolution from his early expressionist works to his later minimalistic composition marked by bold lines, fragmented forms and symbolic content. Central to the discussion are his iconic motifs, the trust bull and the falling figures, oftentimes rendered over his figures, and the depiction of mythological subjects like Kali and bronze sculptures of Mahishasura, which reflect deep psychological and socio-political concerns. By examining his engagement with partition trauma, urban alienation, and spiritual dualities, the paper positions his horror within the broader narrative post-colonial Indian art. His colors, strokes, and immortal figures from his Shantiniketan triptych has been haunting. I call those figures immortal because they touch human life. Like impactful portrayals of figures of the ordinary man or goddess Kali, drawing from memory, myth, and reality, have made him one of leading names in the history of Indian modernism. These modern art masters' falling figures show the disorientation of fragmented figure falling into abyss, metaphorically express man's freedom in very act of infinite. So the appeal of his works remains undiminished and continues to occupy the pride of place. His works were always so relevant to time, perhaps that struggles for survival that he depicts so beautifully in his canvases touches a chord within all of us. His protagonists, be it the ordinary man or mythological beings, have always portrayed very real emotions. There are traces of violence and conflict, and yet there is a harmony in the way he treats the visual through tones and lines. The sense of motion comes perhaps from his work with his moving image. This presentation also considers his role in shaping the progressive artist group legacy and impact on contemporary Indian art markets. Through visual analysis and critical interpretation, this study refines Tyeb Mehta's place and is a visionary who bridged tradition and modernity with striking emotional intensity. So actually he was not part of progressive artist group, as we all know. Like, he was invited from the artists who were all of his friends. Like, so he was so meticulous, non-compromising artist who spent a lifetime defining a language of Indian art. His powerful, unforgettable images are fraught with violence and filled with intensity and anguish. But more importantly, they reveal his profound sensitivity and great capacity for empathy and vulnerability, which is what has made him a true master of his craft. His figures articulate the inner turmoil that he carried with him throughout of his life, especially following his experiences surrounding the partition of India. He was also not kind of artist who could make a hay of sudden career sweat by turning out new work fast. He was slow and steady, meticulous painter and ruthless self-editor who destroyed many more pictures than he ever let out of the studio. He didn't take commissions and was reluctant to produce anything on demand. He also once disagreed to portray Gandhi's portrait. Somebody ordered him, like, so he was a kind of artist. So he always says independence, freedom, and solitude were from him beyond the price. So here actually I wanted to compare his paintings with Francis Bacon's works. Like, this chapter I titled Modernist Western European Different Places and Exploration, Shantiniketan, etc. So interestingly, only Raja Saab only encouraged him to go to visit London. So after that, Tyeb traveled to London and Paris in the mid 1950s, and he found inspiration from Francis Bacon's works. So you can see the comparison between his works. The left panel is Tyeb Mehta's work and the right panel is Francis Bacon's work. So you can see most comparisons are there. Like, the distortion of figures and mainly figure. So interestingly, I read somewhere like Tyeb Mehta painted falling figures and put the titles falling figures and triptych, as Francis Bacon always used to do. So here, if you notice, Tyeb Mehta titled falling figures and Bacon painted figure falling in a landscape. So there are many comparisons are there, like he was a pioneering figure in Indian modern art, whose work reflects a deep engagement with both powerfully in his recurring themes and of suffering, fragmentation and existential anguish. His time abroad, especially in London and New York, is read not merely as a period of stylistic change, but a critical phase of introspection and synthesis. His exposure to international modernist movements informed his critical approach to figuration, space and symbolism. To some imagined example elsewhere, typically in the Euro-American world, Francis Bacon liked direct encounter with images, but we also inherit forms of reading, sedimented modes of interpretation which have the capacity to also distort how we look. Tyeb's images are apocalyptic like Bacon's, but they accomplish their moment's quality. His exposure to the European modernist profoundly influenced his work, which combined traditional Indian techniques with modernist elements. So I read somewhere like Tyeb Mehta used to write letters to Krishen Khanna. So while he was in London, so he used to write letters to Krishen Khanna about the state of art there. So he used to write like in one letter he mentioned it. It is absolutely clear to me that modern painting in India can survive on free exchange of ideas, which he always believe in, that exchanging ideas and feelings among us who care for painting and in general and not for the recognition of individual mediocrity. Minding one's own business would be suicidal in our situation. So while he was staying there and he visited so many exhibitions and he found it very survivingly, he got so problems, so he came back to India after that. So coming to his triptych, his maternal grandparents from Kolkata, and he was very fascinated by his iconography of goddess Kali and Durga. He portrayed Durga in his own unique style with Mahishasura. He read books on the subject and researched the mythology thoroughly. He had a very strong affinity toward Bengal, and when he got invited to be an artist in residence in Kalabhavan Shantiniketan, he states that his images are very carefully chosen. For instance, the first image that he painted with a great deal of thought was the trust bulls. He keeps painted them. He relates to those images like it is like essence into existence. He transforms an ordinary image into a poetic one. While coming to falling figures and many powerful works and distortions, Tyeb's artistic evolution is characterized by a shift from traditional figuration to a bold and modernist abstraction. One of Tyeb's most iconic contributions to modern art is his Falling Figures series. He repeatedly did in 1960 and 1965 and 1994 as well, convey a profound sense of struggle and vulnerability, like captures the moment of a figure's dramatic fall with sense of both physical and emotional turmoil. Practice evolved to a distinct formal economy marked by bold diagonals, minimal palettes and arresting iconography, which he used to interrogate violence, myth and identity. His figure, often depicted as falling, restrained or mythologized, serve as metaphors for the fractured human conditions. that falling figures was born from another struggle within the self, because while Tyeb had decided to avoid an azure narrative, his unique blend of personal narrative and political commentary, positioning his art as a deeply introspective yet universally resonant critique of modern existence. His aesthetic innovation, but also in his ability to confront discomforting truths through the language both deeply personal and culturally symbolic. He allowed himself one stark implement a diagonal of varying color, shape and dimension, repeatedly cutting the single image into two. His work's temperament was a constant interplay in between silence, abstraction and soundless but unmistakable voice of the figure. So, humanist first, then the artist.
You have only 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'm coming to the point. Yeah. So, he always humanist first, then the artist. Personal philosophy is reflected into artworks. Like Tyeb Mehta, always we are celebrating 100 years on this year. Like Tyeb Mehta used to his philosophies, his sensibilities. He always used to say like exchange of ideas in between the artists, younger generations. Like he used to talk with many artists, young artists than him, like Atul Dodia and all. Like once his son Yusuf asked him like, Papa, what we belong to, like what religion we belong to, and he thought for a while and he said, I believe in humanity, I am a humanist, so don't bring me into a religious aspect. Like, so that kind of person he is. Like, so I will end this session here. Like, so there is a conclusion by for the younger generation by to be committed and resilient, individuality, maintain the individuality and authenticity, embrace solitude and power of reflection, draw inspiration from real life experience as Tyeb paintings did, find your own unique form of experience. Thank you, one and all. Thank you.
Anushakti Singh, Tyeb Mehta, my mentor in the art world.
Thank you so much. नमस्कार, मेरा नाम अनुशक्ति सिंह है. Paper is in English though. And I am not particularly from the art segment. However, I am a literary being trying to study art. So here it goes. Tyeb Mehta, the cartographer of modern Indian anguish. As he is hailed, he was hailed. The painter who widely disclaimed tags, whether it is being an expressionist, when almost each of his peers was celebrated in its name, or being a minimalist. However, I would deviate from any format of art here and bring Mehta in parallel with a literary contemporary of him, Saadat Hasan Manto. This could be an extravagant step by me, my sincere apologies for that, but as someone who has breathed, survived and lived in the world of literature, I could not help but bring the parallels, and yes, I saw my Manto thriving in Mehta's grandeurs. When I saw the falling figures, I was instantly reminded of Thandha Ghosh, Kali Salwar and more. Toba Tek Singh, fallen on the earth in his final moments, came alive with falling figures. Opar di Gurgur di annexed di Vedhyana di Magdi Dal of Toba Tek Singh and Pakistan resonated in my ears. It was not merely the memory of lynching, but also the expression which counted. Manto's prose is famed for its lean, efficient nature. Every word counts. There is no unnecessary ornamentation. He achieves maximum emotional impact with minimal language. Mehta's painting does the same visually. He uses flat areas of contrasting colors, textures and details and uses the diagonal line to achieve maximum dramatic tension with minimal means. He delivers the screen without making it gory. It is also important to draw that words limited Manto and it also hit hard ideologies. Fluid art form extended the horizon for Mehta. I would sum it up as a limitation of literature in comparison of art too. Now an insight on how I have known the legendary Tyeb Mehta. A geometry of conflict, reframed mythology and early independence trauma. Tyeb Mehta stands as a monumental figure in Indian modernism, a key member of progressive artists, a key member of progressive artist group PAG, whose art bridged the visual rupture of post-colonial India with aesthetic restraint of global modernism. Historically, Mehta's work has been viewed through the lens of expressionism, emphasizing its visceral representation of personal and communal suffering. The partition, urban violence and poverty, all of them came along. Whether you talk about Riksha Pola, Mahishasur Mardani or falling figures, his artworks echo the algorithms of pain. In this paper, I have tried to make a shift from the traditional view and propose a fresh formalist reading of Tyeb Mehta's work. I strongly feel that his genius lies in austere, calculated use of formal elements, specifically the diagonal division, flat planes of color, and fragmented figures, to transform personal and societal trauma into a universal, almost mystical language of suspended existence and transcendence. His art is not merely an expression of anguish, but a geometry of anguish. His lines and uses of diagonals has always perplexed me. It seems to be a deliberate shift from the Puritan's cubist representation. His diagonals symbolize the internal psychological division of trauma too, representing the feelings of being dismembered or disjointed. It highlights the anguish of not being whole. With this analysis, I have tried to proceed through his three major motifs: the falling figure, the rickshaw puller, and the Mahishasura Durga. It's not going up. Yeah. Now I'll talk about the fractured canvas. Tyeb Mehta once said, if I cut the canvas with a diagonal, I immediately create a certain dislocation. Considering this, Tyeb Mehta's use of diagonal is a significant stylistic shift that moved away from a purely cubist presentation, and even while retaining some of cubist-inspired principles of fragmentation, perhaps the core desire of not being framed in any frame pushed Mehta to embrace diagonals as his expressions. But did he completely ditch cubism or expressionism? Let's explore. As quoted in the darkwall.com, Tyeb Mehta started using the diagonal line in his work accidentally in 1969. At a point, he was experiencing a significant artistic crisis and frustration. In the late 1960s, after returning from a fellowship in New York, Mehta found himself at a creative dead end and unable to move past the limitations of his existing style. In a moment of frustration in 1969, he spontaneously picked up a brush, loaded it with black paint, and struck a single diagonal streak across the canvas he was working on. This impulse was initially intended to destroy the painting. And the discovery, here came the eureka moment. Instead of ruining the work, Mehta immediately realized the compositional power of the line. He noticed that diagonal split the static square canvas into two dynamic triangular areas. Mehta himself described the moment. The moment I use the diagonal, the square splits. It gets momentum, it gets activated. Immediately I realized that I had separated the lower and the upper portion, and I could use the areas of colors. It became a means of dislocating the image and the area of the canvas. And it is also perceived that his diagonals came from certain US influence. His year-long stay in New York in 1968 as a Rockefeller Foundation Fellow served as a crucible where his earlier expressionism collided with new Western concepts, leading to the breakthrough of diagonal line in 1969. I see his diagonals as a political and psychological cleavage as well. The diagonal line in Tyeb Mehta's work transcends its function as mere formal or compositional solution. It operates primarily as a profound visual metaphor for the trauma of 1947 partition of India, an event he witnessed firsthand. The lines of imposition on the canvas physically divides the picture plane, transforming the flat surface into an immediate symbolic representation of the violent, irreversible cleavage of land, community, and the national identity. By slicing the space into the two separate, often conflicting geometrical halves, the diagonal directly transcends the political and geographical rupture of subcontinent into a visual language. Furthermore, when the diagonal intersects the human figure, as seen in the iconic Falling Figure series that you can see here, it symbolizes not only the external fracture of society, but also the internal psychological dislocation experienced by millions who were displaced, killed, or emotionally shattered, thereby making the line the defining mark of historical anguish in his hour. Now, here is the case study of diagonal 15, diagonal XV. Diagonal XV is an oil on canvas work measuring approximately 170 to 131 cm, created at the peak of his engagement with diagonal line, a concept which was introduced in 1969. This painting, in this painting you can see the dominance of diagonal and color. The most striking element is the bold, sharp, lightning bolt diagonal that slices the composition from the upper right to the lower left. This line is executed in a vivid contrasting color. It has axis of conflict, restraint palette, and activation and dislocation. The figures within diagonal XV are archetypal of the series and are central to the works of emotional impact. When I first landed on this picture or on this painting, I could see the despair, the emotionlessness, or an empty canvas, like in the eyes of the girl who is here. It has disjointed human figures. Sometimes it can be identified as two or single figure fractured into multiple parts, with abstract limbs and torsos. One of the figure is in its full volume, its full frame, while other one is fragmented. You can see a limb or hand crawling out. It has enforced unity as well. The key conceptual tension lies in how the diagonal both fragments the figures and simultaneously locks into a cohesive composition. The line is the source of the trauma and the only element maintaining pictorial unity. The tension communicates the trauma of not being whole, reflecting the violent centrifugal forces of post-partition social and political life. Though the faces may be abstracted, there are a few faces which are abstracted. The falling limbs and open, distorted forms communicate a moment of intense, universal anguish and fear. This image is a stark reminder of the violence and suffering that permeated the social fabric of the time, often reinforcing the hysterical trauma of the partition, which left a mark on Mehta's artistic vision. What was Mehta's color palette? It was very stark in color. 2 minutes only. Yeah. Okay. then I'll go to rickshaw polo. This I wanted to. Traditionally seen as the yoked laborers of Mehta, the painting alone could give away a myriad of expressions. It is a part of his much acclaimed diagonal series. Again, when I look at this painting, this trauma of societal absurdity flashes in. The puller yoked in his hand rickshaw, his neck tilted into a crucified angle, and handles of rickshaw following their own subtle diagonals. It is indeed a symbol of urban manual labor, elevated to an archetype type of societal oppression. However, as an observer, it will be absolutely unjustified to overlook the expression of the passenger. Again, it is not in abstract form. I would bring it a little down. Please look at the expression of the passenger. Again, it is not in abstract form, but the expression could be an absolute example of a catch-22 situation. The passenger is caught in a paradox where ease is the desire, but on what cost? Of bondage labor. Here I am convinced to see this painting as a self-portrait of Mehta based on his Kolkata experiences, an emblem to an experience which could not be cherished in any manner, which is the loud volume of bondage labor. Also in my purview, the tilt in the neck is in the particular painting also creates a link with Christian mythology, creating a perfect cross with alignment of rickshaw handle. Mahishasur Mardani, that's all. Yeah. The Mahishasura series, which Tyeb Mehta began painting in 1990s, represents a culmination of his artistic journey, marking a decisive move from processing his own personal and political trauma to exploring universal and philosophical dualities, unlike his earlier works like The Falling Figures and The Rickshaw Puller, which were rooted in the immediate visceral memory of 1947 partition and urban suffering. The mythological series allowed him to utilize an established culture narrative as a framework for timeless and existential questions. In a conversation with Yashodhara ji only, she's not here right now, he has quoted, "I have always wanted to paint a mother goddess at Shantiniketan. In Bengal, I could feel the presence of Kali and Durga." Moving forward to that. I would like to note that Mehta's genius lies in his radical reinterpretation of the mythological conflict. It is seen as very, his Mahishasur Mardani depiction is very different from the traditional reading, and it seems to be in very coherence with the Mahishasura. And from my feminist point of view, it takes an alternate route. It is the kinder Durga who is willing to forgive her abuser, but the intimate embrace or consummative draws of Mahishasur Mardini and the demon somewhere highlights a typical man's perspective, where even a woman is giving up to her abuser. This is how I conclude. Thank you so much.
And the last speaker, Kumar. Tyeb Mehta's journey through the structures of Indian modernism.
Good evening to everyone. I extend my sincere greeting to the chair, Mr. Vajpayee, and to all the distinguished art historians, curators, art writers, and fellow researchers gathered here today. It is an honor to present this paper on the century of one of the most profound figure of Indian modernism, that is Tyeb Mehta. And on the screen you are seeing this work is by Riaz Komu, exhibited in last year in Art Fair, Delhi. So as 2025 marks 100 years since the birth of Tyeb Mehta, it becomes essential not only to revisit the iconic status of this singular modernist, but also to interrogate the structure, archival, curatorial, and economic, through which his legacy has been shaped. My presentation draws on primary archival material, retrospective catalogue, auction histories, and critical art historical scholarship to resituate Mehta within the longer cartographics of Indian modernism. My paper examines four intervened vectors, that is partition as on archival one, the event that made an artist. Second is curatorial revision, positioning Mehta within one beyond the progressive. Third is market canon and the globalization of Indian modernism. And the fourth one is the remapping Indian modernism market, institution and transitional values. So first, we will discuss partition as an archival goal, the event that made an artist. The fundamental archive of Tyeb Mehta's practice originated not in museum or catalog, but in a movement of extreme historical violence. In 1947, on Muhammad Ali Road, the young Mehta witnessed a mob kill a man during the partition riot. This traumatic event, repeatedly referenced in interview and oral histories, became the first document in the archival of his art. Rather than pictorial description, Mehta's response is formal, psychological, and ethical translation, seen most powerful in the early falling figure, that is trustful, and later the diagonally divided bodies with their distinctly post-partition phenomenology of violence. These bodies, fractured and suspended, enact the memory of nation attempting to find coherence amid rupture. Archival material like exhibition catalog, film division, notes from Kudal, and Trinele documentation all reveals that Mehta's modernism emerged through restraint, not excess. His language of minimalism became a site where history of confronted through silence, not specters. Rather than reading Mehta's trauma as anecdotal, we might understand it as a visual archive of South Asian modernity, echoing border narrative of displacement and disposition. A counterpoint to nationalism myth-making, insisting on a modernism grounded not in utopian optimism but in the fracture of partition. This placed Mehta within what Gayatri Gopinath calls the visuality of trauma that redefines the modern Indian body. And Gayatri Gopinath is an associate professor in the Department of Social and Cultural Analysis and director of the Center of the Study of Gender and Sexuality at New York University. Curatorial revision, positioning Mehta within the beyond the progressive. Though often aligned with the progressive artist group, Mehta occupies a more ambitious position. He was not a founding member, yet curatorial discourse from the 2010 NGMA retrospective and the JNF catalog shows a persistent desire to read him through the progressive lens. Curating the belated progressive. Curators have had to reconcile Mehta's chronological distance from PAG's early year with his deep and intellectual kinship with Souza, Raza, Husain, and Ram Kumar. This created curatorial category of the belated progressive, an artist whose aesthetic spirit aligned with the group even as his formal breakthrough occurred after its dissolution. And the second point is the London and New York year encounter, fragmentation, and the birth of the diagonal. Working briefly in a morgue in London, struggling with the anonymity of metropolitan exile, and encountering Bacon and geometry, these experiences transform Mehta's relationship to the figure. The diagonal emerges here, and its importance has often been flattered into stylistic commentary, and a closer reading suggests the diagonal as a structure. This is the diagonal, one of the painting from diagonal series made in 1976. Image courtesy is Christie's. So a diagonal is a structural metaphor of violence, silencing bodies and spaces, much like broader cut through geographies. A modernist tragedy of compression, reducing from to element state. And the third one, a curatorial challenge: how does one display canvas whose formal device it itself an articulation of rupture? New York's 1960s avant-garde movement minimalized and abstract expressionism, offered Mehta an alternative to Bacon's expressionism. His Rockefeller Fellowship period makes a shift toward planar austerity, which became decisive in his later mythological series. From the late 1960s onward, Mehta diagonal line became a structure and metaphorical axis. Curators considerably foreground it as first is a symbol of division, second a device of fracture, and a compositional response to a post-colonial dislocation. Exhibition layout increasingly positioned the diagonal as a visual key to reading the aware, transforming it into an interpretive tool rather than a stylistic signature. Mythic modernism, myth as a modern device, Kali, Mahishasur, and the politics of ethnography. From the late 1980s onward, Mehta turned to myth, not as a revivalist gesture, but as a critical reframing of Indian ethnography. Drawing on Shantiniketan's intellectual atmosphere, this period reveals a modernist interrogation of art style. A major curatorial challenge emerged with Mehta's mythic work, notably Mahishasura and Kali. These canvases resist categorization. They are neither devotional nor illustrative. Curatorial research suggests they operate as a metaphoric container for cyclical violence, resistance, and existential struggle. This mythic turn has allowed curators to place Mehta within global modernist conversation alongside Bacon's psychological bodies and Rothko's chromatic tension. Mahishasura and Kali are crucial here. They are post-secular images refusing devotional sentimental in favor of psychological tension. They repurpose myth to articulate violence, gendered power, and existential fragility. They challenge curators to situate these works between tradition and modernism without collapsing them into either. Curator's strategy employed in 2020 JNF retrospective, highlighting this complexity by placing these canvases beside his early falling figures, exposing an unexpected continuity between mythic and modern. And now we are on third point, market canon and the globalization of Indian modernism. The Mehta meteoric rise in the global art market, culminating in the historical Christie's sale of Mahishasura in the year 2005 and the recent rupees 61.8 crore sale of Trust Pool in the year 2025 month April, demand a critical reading beyond celebration. Auction archive and catalog reveal several transformation. First is the market as canon maker, that is the market canonized Mehta faster than institution. Auction house, not museum, often frame the narrative of India's great modernist. Sacristy as a value. Mehta practice of destroying unsatisfactory canvas individuality position him within a market logic of rarity. A shift in cultural ownership. The rise of NRI collector and globalized wealth network shifted Mehta from a national figure to a transitional community fetish, raising urgent question about. First is accessibility, second is preservation, and the third one is ethics of collection. Yet Mehta himself resisted this market logic, insisting on the moral stakes of painting. And Ranjit Hoske observation says that Mehta embodied the difference between price and value is especially poignant in the moment of speculative frenzy. Now, fourth is the remapping Indian modernism, market, institution, and transitional value. In the last 2 decades, Mehta's position within art history has been transformed by the global market, archival rediscovery, and changing museum strategies. The market as an alternative archive, auction record, now critical research source, map the shifting cultural values of Mehta, where the sales of Mahishasura and Trust Bull 2005 and 2025 mark a transition from national recognition to globalization. However, these market narrative can obscure and the decades when the Mehta struggle financially worked in near isolation and destroyed numerous canvases. Institutional rereading of modernism. Tate, MoMA, Asian and Art Museum now incorporate Mehta into global modernist framework. This institutional shift is reshaping art historical discourse, moving Indian modernism away from regional narrative towards a cosmopolitan art history. Urban modernism and the unseen archive. While Mehta's mythic work dominate public memory, archival fragmented from his film Kudal, his London years and the Nizamuddin period reveal an artist deeply engaged with everyday urban alienation. This lesser known archive points toward future curatorial project capable of reframing Mehta as a chronicle of post-colonial city, not merely the mythic symbolist or the painter of trauma. This is a timeline of his artwork. 1952 he is graduated from JJ School of Art, and 1956 he painted Trust Bull, and later set Indian auction record this year in the month of April, and then 1959 to 64 London Sojourn Depend exposure to European modernism where he met the European artists. 1965 to 68 Falling Figure exhibition, he got gold medal from the Lalit Kala Academy and exhibited in the year 1968. And then 1969 he began his diagonal series, developed a signature device, splitting the canvas till 1976. And 1993 Shantiniketan triptych he painted and produced after heart attack he produced this work, and this work is highly regarded. And 1996 Mahishasura he painted, sold for rupee in $58 million Christie's in the year 2005. First Indian modernist to cross $1 million in the art market. And then 1997 he painted Kali series, modernist mythic invention, major reference for later Carey style. And 2002 he painted Celebration in the triptych form. And 2007 he got Padma Bhushan awarded, honored by the government of India. And 2025 already discussed, Trust Bull sold as by the Saffron Art, second highest price for the Indian painting. These are the painting Blue Doors in 1976 and the untitled which is called Shantiniketan Triptych made in 1986 or 87. And before conclusion, I'm going to read conclusion. As we stand at the threshold of Tyeb Mehta's century, we encounter an artist who not only shaped Indian modernism but also transformed its ethical and aesthetic horizon. Mehta's legacy invites us to rethink modernism as point a space of witnessing, second a train shaped by historical research, and third one is a field of continuous curatorial re-examination, and fourth one is a site where global and local narrative intersect. Or we can say that Tyeb Mehta represents far more than a recurring auction headlines or a modernist master. His work is a visual archive of trauma, refusing to let partition dissolve into historical amnesia, and a critical extension of the progressive rather than their neat continuation. And the last one, a site where myth, modernism and morality converge in unprecedented way. A crucial case study in how global market construct, distort and circulate modernism value. His painting endured not as a market triumph but as ethical proportions, act that confront the fragility, dignity and resilience of the human condition. Mehta's century therefore is less a commemoration and more a call to revisit the unresolved histories and silence embedded in Indian modernism. Thank you.
Well, friends, you have heard 5 papers. This is the longest session, and 5 persons looking at Tyeb Mehta's work, life, career, impact, etc. Also, quite frequently, the post-colonial, this, that and the other has also been used, much to my dislike. But anyway, so now it is open to the House. If there are any questions, yes, please. Yeah. No, let the mic come. Hold on.
Thank you, and I'm going to ask questions from most of you today. And so the first speaker, Arzu Haji, I'm wondering why you connected Shahid Aga Ali to Tyeb Mehta, because apart from the fact that it was partition trauma and they were not in correspondence, they had not met. And I'm also wondering about the theories you used, the Rasa theory, and then you went to Horace's Ars Poetica and then went on to Lessing, 1766. So I think that a better way to look at it would have been through the modernist vocabulary of fragmentation and stream of consciousness and breakage. But even so there, I have a feeling that perhaps a better comparison could have been with perhaps Veer Munshi or Ghulam Muhammad, because there is a kind of lyricism in their works, and I think it would have gone, but just for you to think about. To Anshul, I had a problem with your
one at a time. One at a time.
I'll just read off all the questions.
No. Let them answer. Yeah, go ahead.
It's yours.
Okay.
Yeah.
Basically, I'm coming from the background of English literature, where we are constantly exposed to Aga Shahid Ali, and Aga Shahid Ali being one of the favorite poets for me. When I was reading Country Without Post Office, and then I saw the painting. So I thought there is, some similarity between these two, and then I went for the studies.
Thank you. And just Anshul, I had a problem with the way you kept using the word deep and primitive for Tyeb Mehta, because I think primitive is not the right word to use. You could use primal. He was not a primitivist. You could use primal, you could use archetypal, but primitive has different meanings. So
I thought that in his early painting of the Trust Bowl, we can see the raw-cut primitivism in his work. So that's why I use that primitive form. Like humans are from the civilization itself. One artist mentions that before the hunters, we were the artists. So the primitivism came from them. So therefore.
because generally we do not associate.
Sorry.
Now the next.
No. Let her ask, then you will have chance again.
So my question is for Gaurav. I had several issues with the paper. It read a lot like AI generated content, but that's separate. The question that I wanted to ask, what in your opinion is post-secular image making? And if you could give me the name of the critic that you said from NYU.
The first one is Ranjit Hoske.
That's Ranjit Hoske, but the other one.
Yeah.
But anyway, the other question is that how you're constantly dabbling with the term ethical, but without essentially talking about which aspects of ethical concerns is Tyeb talking about, was Tyeb talking about, or one can see in his
So
works.
basically वो ethical में market को लेके बात कर रहे हैं. वो as in उस तरह के आर्टिस्ट नहीं हैं जो उनको सिर्फ अर्न करना है. वो चाह रहे हैं कि उनके वो फीलिंग को समझे. लाइक जितनी भी उनकी पेंटिंग्स हैं वो डे टू डे लाइफ को फील करके उनके पेन को फील करके उन्होंने वो सब कुछ पोर्ट्रेट किया है. बी इट रिक्शा पुलर एंड फॉलिंग फिगर एंड ऑल दैट. तो एथिकल मीन्स जो मार्केट में अनएथिकल चीज़ें होती हैं उस टर्म्स में, लाइक वैल्यू इंक्रीज एंड डिक्रीज काइंड ऑफ थिंग्स.
So you could have chosen not to send those work for sale, did it?
No, it's depend on gallerist and these.
Come on, that's too naive to say that.
No.
Anyway, even naive answers are acceptable because they are answers. Yes? So, back to, is there someone?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, sure.
Well, my question is most basic, down to earth. I'm very down to earth. When you said his paintings are scarce, and that's why they're costly. Probably you hinted that. Well, Ramkumar has made more than 5,000 canvases. Do you mean to say that Tyeb Mehta knowingly destroyed 7 of his earlier options and kept the 8th one, creating a scarcity, hoping that it will fetch a price?
No.
Don't we, art critics, writers, other than common men like me, tend to read too much into artist's work, for his life, for his works, even just as another work, without meaning anything. Now we are finding meaning. That's what I find the Indians are very good at. To find meanings into the author when he himself didn't mean any damn thing. Yours.
So, उनकी जो आर्ट है वो स्केट्स मीन्स की लाइक महिषासुर और कालिकॉम लेते हैं तो आइकनोग्राफी के हिसाब से तो नहीं बनाया गया उसे. एंड देन हम सबको आदत है कि जैसे राजा जो बना हमारे सामने उसको प्रेजेंट किया देवी इसको, हमें वो देखने की आदत है. तो स्केट्स वर्ड उस टर्म में यूज किया गया.
Yes.
It's not related to mythological figures.
So I mean to say scarcity has nothing to do with the art being good or bad or costly or cheaper. Then the Tyeb and Ramkumar are on the opposite ends.
Okay.
So scarcity is probably the wrong word. Maybe you might.
I'll correct.
That's correct.
Yes, now, back to you.
I know there was just one problem that I had with your paper. It was very exciting when you began, but you just didn't carry the comparison further. And you began with Manto's Toba Take-Sing and the creating maximum tension with minimum lines. And I thought that you would go, at the last image of Toba Take-Sing on the barbed wire line between India and Pakistan, and I thought that you would go further. But it just, sort of your paper went into a close reading of Tyeb Mehta's various artworks, but it did not, like your title says, it did not really explore Manto and Tyeb, but I thought it was exciting.
Oh well, I am not a resident of art world, as I would say. I'm an outsider, and I had the pressure of actually, bringing the two together. Since I could not, Manto is what my exposure is. Manto has been my exposure. So when those falling frames came to me, it just came to my. It is Manto's it feels like Tanda Ghosh is there, Kali Salwar is there. But then I also had the pressure. There will be art critics from the genre, and then they'll be reading a paper in a particular synchronized manner. So I wanted to actually fit into that particular shoes as well. So I perhaps went into the formal reading, but then if you could actually stress upon, when I read about rickshaw puller, so I did not see what my reading was entirely different from what is being given there. To me, rickshaw puller is more like the passenger on the rickshaw puller seems to be his personal, like his self-image also. And I had narrated it to one of my friends that it seems to be as if rickshaw puller is the Jesus, crucified Jesus, and my painter friend was very excited to listen to that particular analogy. And this is what I mentioned in my note as well. And also going to that last line, I have brought in my feminist purview, because the way people seem to hail the Mahishasur-Mardini as embraced as new ideology, but when I looked at it, I found that it is kind of Durga is succumbing to her own abuser. So to me, which I was not agreeing upon. So I mean, he was like, I started with the Manto POV, but then yes, I kind of succumbed to the pressure of creating a perfect paper. But yes, I kept my POVs there in the paper, and which I feel that if I participate more into such lectures or papers, I'll be better.
Yeah, thank you. And lastly, the idea, I just wanted to say one last thing, and I'm sorry, I will leave the mic. The last thing that I want to say is this idea of auctions and creating a scarcity. But remember, the diagonal line or whatever we have been talking on and on about was discovered in 1969. And if you're I would request that we place things in historical context. And 1974 was JP's movement, Mehengai Ka. It was a very different India at that time. And the world of auctions and Christie's and Sotheby's and all, it was a very different world there. So I'm not sure how much. I think I would request that we place the works at the time. There has to be a contextualization, and we cannot take a post-liberal age back into the age of the post-Nehruvian or Indira Gandhi. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
Anybody else? No? So may I request you to vacate?
Thank you so much.
What is the next one? Huh? Chai? Oh, so let's go and have some tea.
A man who did not believe in the power of God, but a man who spent the early years of his life going with his grandmother from Mass to the Catholic Church, which meant every day. So when you think of the fact that he moves from Goa to Mumbai, in those days known as Bombay, he was an obedient grandson because he would go with his grandmother. But while his grandmother was busy listening to the liturgical service and also being a part of the Catholic hymns, here was Francis Newton Souza, who was sitting and what the British would call twiddling your thumbs and toes, and just looking around at the church. But just looking around at the church can be an exercise that fills your mind, it fills your senses, and you take back with you, irrespective of your will, the Eucharistic service, the hymns that were sung, as well as that whole system of the priest who have been trained in order to give communion, and that little boy sits and gazes at the elements that are used for the communion. It is all these things that became his subjects. And while he wanted to deny the presence of God, the most important thing is that it is everything that he denied that crept into his canvases. And so when I met him in 1993, he was a man who was much softer. The only thing that we argued about was the nude subject of the woman, as well as friendships. And he would tell me that I paint a nude because I believe a woman has to be attacked. And I would tell him, a woman is not an object of desire. She is not meant to be attacked. She is meant to be cherished. She is meant to be loved. And he would tell me, Manai, you are more Victorian than Victoria. But I want to tell you that we had the most engaging conversations at the Kumar Gallery in Sundarnagar Market, a very small gallery. I cannot remember the first exhibition of his that I saw, 1993. 23 works, little jewels, landscapes, only landscapes. They were just London and New York. And from then began a relationship. I will come back to that when the two young ladies read and after they say what they have to say. You are looking at a work called The Family. This is an important work. It is a work that belongs to 1946. And in terms of situational irony, for a man who married so many times and had so many girlfriends, the family is a very orthodox subject for him. But if we look at it, the details, the texture, the manner in which in that little doorway he brings in a part of the landscape, and how he gives us the family, and how he relates to every element. Are we just only looking at the vessels that he gives us? We can also see the manner in which he creates the lady of the house with a cross and her necklace, and how he also gives us the Madonna and child on the wall. But typically impasto, typically rough-hewn, rustic elements of rural rhythms of Goa, the land he loved, the land he never forgot. And so I invite today two wonderful young ladies. It will be lovely to listen to the things that they have to say. The first lady is Miss Saha. I invite you. Thank you.
Thank you Uma, for the lovely introduction. And I think enough has really been spoken about Souza today. A lot about his work, his contribution to Bombay Progressives. So my paper is titled as Diaries of an Exile, Dissecting Labor and Food Production in Portuguese Goa through the absence presence motive in F.N. Souza's paintings. And well, just for an introduction, F.N. Souza was born in 1925 in Saligao, a small Goan colony shaped by centuries of Portuguese rule. And it operated almost as a country of its own, a land that is marked by fluid identities, overlapping sovereignties, and long histories of displacement. Souza emerges from this liminality, first moving to Bombay and later to London, carrying with him a sense of perpetual wandering. And what interests me today is how this unsettled sense of origin seeps into his early landscapes. These paintings are sites where a fragmented self of his searches for a fixed address. And for this, I turn to his autobiographical writings, Nirvana of the Maggots and Walls and Lines. Labeled as the enfant terrible of modern Indian art, he came of age through a series of ruptures. The deaths of his father Joseph Newton and later his sister, and his mother Lily's move to Bombay and its own expulsions, first from his school for drawing erotic figures on the laboratory walls and then from the JJ School of Art for anti-colonial dissent. After all this, what survives is a turbulence of a man who profusely wrote everything down, pinned everything down. His memoirs are very vivid, recording the rooms that he lived in, the streets that he drifted through, and the bodies that he observed, and the contempt and fascination they stirred in him. And it is this compulsive urge of recording and archiving that we see migrating into his landscapes. Whether in the erasure of laboring bodies, the traces of work left on land, or the memory of food simmering through domestic spaces, Souza builds a world out of what is lost, withheld, or deliberately forgotten. I turn to his early 1940s landscape and socio-realist paintings to examine how national identity, exile, and displacement shape his sense of being. Across these works, Souza constructs a genealogy of landscapes tied to labor and history of food production, which is visualized through a deliberate vocabulary of absence. So we really delve into what is this absence and what provokes this absence and how does it shape the way that food is produced in these Goan landscapes and later consumed within the domestic spheres of the Goan homes. And in the course of this paper, I move from the fields to the homes, tracing three key sites in these Goan paintings: the agricultural landscape where food is grown, the marketplace where it is circulated, and the domestic interior where it is finally prepared and consumed. To provide a history, yet again, landscape painting enters India through traveling European artists who introduce an entirely new visual grammar: mountains, rivers, trees set against a distant horizon and open sky. Within Indian art, nature is transformed from a backdrop to a subject in its own right. And into this very moment walks a young Souza at the JJ School of Art in Bombay, a colonial institution that is affiliated with the Royal Academy and whose pedagogy focused on genre paintings and plaster cast nude studies. And these pillars formed these pillars of academic realism, which prided itself on scientific replication and anatomical accuracy, forms sort of an influence in his landscape paintings that he tries to resist, but again it leaves its traces behind, like Uma pointed out. So this is where genre paintings become crucial. By convention, what are genre paintings? Genre paintings show ordinary figures but without identity, anonymous workers, interchangeable bodies, and faceless people performing everyday tasks, as opposed to history paintings. Souza inherits this tradition, and the practice of stripping the laboring body of individuality and turning it into an archetype in his early landscapes comes into ground. And although he was a prize student, he felt only disdain for this training. His steaming biography reflects scorn for the laboring bodies as he looks down upon the haggling coolies, lepers and beggars, the pile drivers who frequent the state of colonial Bombay. And this is mentioned in Nirvana of a Maggot. Yet when he turns to Goa, which is also a colonized territory, laboring peasants return as muses who are elevated within his pictorial world. This selective recognition forms the heart of his antagonistic politics. Following Professor Shukla Sawant's argument, placing the human body within the scope of the landscape positions it as both a shaper and shifter of the environment. Mythologizing on the creator and created discourse, the insertion of bodies as elements of toil provokes a charged sense of viewership that situates the body as active interlocutors within the landscape. Souza's 1940 sketches reveal a series of practice sketches, which are these ones that I'm talking about, where he relies on the premise of laboring bodies as a part of his art school curriculum. The figures appear engaged in motion, they carry tools and agricultural implements that further certify their vocational nature. And when these bodies eventually enter his developed landscapes, they never meet our gaze, they never look back, they never face the viewer. In the year 1942, rice paddy in Goa demonstrated an advancement and evolution of style in Souza's oeuvre. The swampy ground still ripples with freshly poured water. The sun hasn't dried yet. Everything in the scene suggests labor that has just occurred and then been abruptly suspended, and the worker has only just withdrawn. Such landscapes invite inquiry into the representation of human labor and its systematic and deliberate erasure from the spaces that it inhabits and shapes. And this is where Souza's landscapes become compelling. They force us to ask, where is the worker? Are they away for a meal? Are they away for a brief rest? Do the nearby houses imply a return or simply a life that is lived in constant proximity to toil? The land, even in the absence of the laboring body, is tended, trimmed and tamed by hands that we no longer see. The absence of the body doesn't make the scene idyllic. It sharpens the void. The fields are not untouched. They are saturated with human presence and emptied of the human figure. Labor lingers as an identity and trace that is felt everywhere but blurred away from the realm of the scopic visuality. Again, since we are talking about food production, and this is a land, agricultural land really, how do we really connect memory and food and land? So to really talk about that, I would like to cite Proust and his episode of the Madeleine, where he lays out the process of memory building that food invokes when he dips his Madeleines in lemon tea. So Fatima Fernandez, in her scholarship on Goan food history and its cartographic diffusion, attributes this memory phenomenon of lost sensations to the Goan scenario in eating fish, curry and rice, the daily Goan meal. Like Proust Madeleines and lemon tea, this humble Goan combo, fish, curry, rice, engage taste and visuality to bring remembrance and recollection into play. Souza in Nirvana of the Maggots also gives vivid recollective accounts. He describes his Goan yesteryears through food that is tactile and excessive. He remembers Salu, his domestic help, tidying the house and serving him boiled rice, red-hot curry and fried fish, served in heaps on a brass plate, as he comes back from a swim on a sultry summer day. His prose spills over with ingredients pulled straight from the Goan soil. He recalls resting under a mango plantation. Then comes the extravagant dinners at the vicar's parochial cottage. Stuffed cock, roasted piglings, sausages, turtle eggs, snails and cocktails sweetened with fruit kernels. With such profusion, one might assume that the land was endlessly fertile. Yet Souza reminds us it was often marked by primitive farming, erosion and famine. Fernandez's archival work return us to the mango central to the Goan culture and recurrently appearing in Souza's paintings. She also documents how women carried out the labor of tilling, harvesting and preparing rice using specialized tools and folk songs that became the vessels of shared memory and solidarity. And it is within this dense food culture that Souza's local marketplace scenes from 1944 and 1945 become very crucial. Goan Peasants in the Market, which is painted in 1944, and Parasols 1945, show working women as vendors in open-air bazaars, baskets in front, most faces hollowed out. Two cockerels appear in one scene, and we are urged to ask yet again, who are these women? What was the nature of the marketplaces in Portuguese Goa? Are they farmers by nature, or do some of them belong to the basket-weaving Mahar community? In paintings like Parasols, the second one, the vendors cooped under dish-shaped parasols sit under the blazing sun adjacent to their baskets, which this time contain food and crops in abundance, as contrary to the first painting, Goan Peasants. The parasols conceal their face as the vendors turn their back on the viewers, calling out to the sellers, gradually dissipating in the background. In village scene with pigs and chickens, animals and humans demarcate the foreground. Both the buyers and sellers are draped in high-waist sari falling over their ankles with no differentiation in attire. Dressed in a similar pattern but distinguished by varied skin tones, they engage throughout the scene. With their feet and left shoulders left bare, these figures recall the Kunbi worker, hair tied in a low bun, the drapery lifted for the ease of movement and the body ready for labor. And in the midst of this seemingly indigenous scene, the architecture begins to speak. The humble red-tiled, slanted roof house sit beside a grand palatial facade, its arched doorway opening straight into the marketplace as markers of the Portuguese influence. Similar facades appear again and again in the works of the contemporary Portuguese artist Zsom, where the building of the landscape of Portugal becomes visible. In Souza's scene, the architectural intrusions reminds us of the layered histories that shape the Goan life. And through it all, the rooster motif keeps appearing, sometimes in the marketplace like this, sometimes as a terracotta sentinel atop Goan homes. Borrowed from the rooster of Barcelos, it animates a folkloric pulse that runs through Souza's landscapes. Now we come from the marketplaces to the home, a panoramic mode of viewing structures in Souza's paintings, from the agricultural fields where food is produced to the interiors where it is prepared, preserved and consumed. In agrarian Goa, rice was the dominant crop, but as Fernandez shows, it also functioned as a political instrument. Between 1900 to 1961, landlords and the Convened used rice not merely as a product but as leverage, exploiting muntkars and poor farmers who were seldom paid their rightful wage. The humble morsel thus became entangled in the socio-economic politics of Goa, exerting power over the very subaltern bodies that labor to produce it. Souza's Indian family, produced after his expulsion from JJ College and during the formation of the Bombay Progressives, mark a mature turn in his politics and pictorial language. A family of four occupies the canvas with monumental frontality. Food becomes a crucial structuring device. A small heap of rice and two empty bowls lie at their feet, while behind them lies a rectangular portal initially resembling a still life painting. It opens into the domestic interior. Unlike conventional still life painting and the orderliness that it carries, the basket of eggs and the fish sits and the wine bottle is cropped mid-frame, capturing the natural disorder of a household dinner table. Food sociability becomes a marker of identity and deprivation. Fernandez notes that Bhatkars often paid muntkars in kind with rice. The tiny heap at their feet alludes directly to this exploitative practice. Abundance is present in the background, yet withheld from the people who produce it. The profusion of food within an arm's reach sharpens the sense of forbiddance and deepens the painting's emotional charge. Souza positions these marginal bodies literally at the margins of the home, gathered on the staircase, which is an intermediate threshold that captures their fragile suspended place between visibility and exclusion. Souza paints what he writes and successively writes vividly about what he paints. The idiom of absence runs through his oeuvre, shaped by his own prolonged absence from Goa. And this matters because the paucity of scholarship on Goa's food production and agrarian landscapes often leaves the region suspended in a romanticized imagery. Against this eulogized vision, Souza's work performs what Hal Foster calls an archival impulse, a desire to summon the history of a land through its sites of remembrance, of labor, of memory and erasure. If collective memory is usually entrusted to monuments, Souza's paintings operate instead as mnemonic metaphors holding what refuses to be commemorated elsewhere. And this impulse does not die with him, it is carried forward into the works of his grandson Solomon Souza, who jokingly calls himself quarterly Indian, and yet continually returns to Goan landscapes as though reclaiming what exile once had fractured. The rooster, the red-tiled roof, the coconut-lined horizons, they fade, they weather, and yet they refuse to disappear. And that's my presentation. Thank you. Today, tomorrow, as always, as Souza would have loved to conclude.
No, I'm happier standing. Habits of an old English teacher. As Souza used to say, old-fashioned English teacher, Madaya. Miss Saha. The beauty of Francis Newton Souza is that he never wanted anyone to be literal in their reading of his works. We have here with us a very seasoned art critic. She's been writing for years and she has covered so many artists and is a master at her prose. Meera Manises. Please stand, Meera. Please stand. It's an honor for me that you are here.
You are a seasoned art critic. Far before me.
Miss Saha, while your topic was extremely delightful, I'm disappointed that you just kept reading what is literal translation of every image. 1, 2. If we have to bring in the politics of a geography into the art of a man who has dedicated his early works to the memory of his land, you are depriving him of his emotions. What is Francis Newton Souza without his emotions? What is Francis Newton Souza without letting us know that every memory becomes the leaf of a page? What is Francis Newton Souza without what Ashok sir calls Anubhav? What we in Malayalam call Anubhavam. Everything in life is born of Anubhav. And I also want to say that when we think of all that he wrote, his arrogance and the way he mocked, unforgettable words. India is a country that despises her artists and is ignorant about her heritage. This is Francis Newton Souza many years ago. And when I met him in those last years, I told him, the God that you deny will be the same God who will make you $1 million master. At the end, I will tell you how we continue that conversation. We come to the young lady from Goa. I am sure she's going to give us enlightenment.
That's heavy words, but I try, ma'am.
Bless you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here. I'm sure we can all take a moment to look at this slide. Today, I want us to rethink a story we all believe we already know. The story of F.N. Souza, of S.H. Raza, and of the Progressive Artists Group. We tend to speak of these artists as if they existed and operated in silo, in sealed containers. Souza, the enfant terrible. Raza, the meditative abstractionist. Two geniuses traveling two completely different paths. But when you enter the archives, when you read their letters, trace their movements, place their works side by side, a very different picture emerges. A picture of dialogue, influence, disagreement, mentorship, critique, and philosophical tension. A picture in which Souza and Raza are not opposites, but counterpoints, not isolated auteurs, but participants in a shared search for meaning. This presentation is about that search. It is about revisiting Souza's legacy, not through the caricature of scandal or controversy, but through the relational, intellectual, and philosophical ecosystem he inhabited. And ultimately, it is about why revisiting these histories matters today. Let us begin in 1947. India becomes independent. A nation is reborn politically. But what about culturally, visually, aesthetically? There is a crisis. Should Indian art continue the colonist realist traditions taught in British academies? Should it turn to the revivalist schemes of the Bengal school? Or should it invent something new, something modern, cosmopolitan, yet rooted? Into this moment, the Progressive Artists Group erupts. Souza, Raza, Ara, Gade, Bakre, and Husain, each with different backgrounds, but united with one shared urgency. India must have its own modernism. Not imitation, not revivalism, but a new visual language. Souza became the group's intellectual engine, the ideologue who articulated freedom as the cornerstone of modern artistic identity. Raza, observant, quieter, absorbed this discourse, and soon his own path began to diverge in relation to Souza, not outside of him. Souza's art is a world of fracture. His thick black contour is not just a line, it's a scalpel. He cuts into the body, he dissects hypocrisy, he exposes the raw mechanics of faith and desire. In his works like Crucifixion from the 1950s, made in post-war London, Christ is not a divine figure, but a wounded flesh and bone human, a symbol of suffering, abuse, and existential anguish. Souza was raised Catholic in Goa, but he rebelled against institutional religion. He didn't reject belief, he rejected pretense. Think about this. What do you feel about practicing the colonizer's religion? It's something even I've thought about because I'm a Roman Catholic from Goa too. And also practicing that religion in a colony that was colonized twice over. Important things to keep in mind when you read Souza. His art asks, what does faith mean when suffering is real? What does beauty mean when life is so brutal? Souza's figuration is always a confrontation, and that's how I read it. A confrontation with colonial morality, with religious authority, with social hypocrisy, and with himself. This is crucial. Souza's rupture is not stylistic, it's philosophical. Now contrast this with Raza. After arriving in Paris in 1950, Raza absorbs European modernism. Cézanne's structure, Kandinsky's inner necessity, Rothko's vibration. But he also reconnects with something that is deeply Indian. The tantras, the mandalas, cosmic geometry, the metaphysics of sound and color. Slowly, landscapes dissolve into abstraction. By the 1970s, the Bindu emerges, the point of origin, consciousness, and creation. So if Souza's world is rupture, Raza's is centering. If Souza fractures the surface, Raza stabilizes it. Souza depicts the body as battleground. Raza depicts the cosmos as equilibrium. And yet, this is key. Both artists are responding to the same existential question. How do we rebuild meaning after rupture? Political, spiritual, psychological? One turns outwards to chaos, the other inwards to cosmos. Both are negotiating the same crisis of transformation. We move to these excerpts from this book called Geezers, where I've taken out a couple of excerpts from these letters that were exchanged between Souza and Raza, and also Krishen Khanna. These correspondences complicate the myth that each artist operated alone. It shows Souza offers formal and technical counsel to Raza. It's the first paragraph on the left-hand side. Unfortunately, the editing on the computer covers it. But you can see where Souza advises Raza and tells him that you must work in oils. There are immense possibilities in that medium, and you can find it in watercolors. And as you work, you will be surprised. You will get brilliant ideas. Don't buy a small piece of canvas, start big. Souza offers formal and technical counsel to Raza. Their letters also reveal material reciprocity, evidence of diasporic interdependence. Their artistic vocabularies are shaped through exchange and genuine friendship. What we gain here is evidence of co-formation, which is that the idea that Indian modernism evolved through relationships. Their correspondence was not always harmonious. Raza criticizes Souza's public persona, calling it self-publicity. Souza criticizes Raza's early works as lacking intensity. Krishen Khanna criticizes Souza's Paris phase as formulaic. This is not conflict, it's conversation. Conversation between friends, between contemporaries, between artists. It shows that Indian modernism wasn't built on consensus, it was built on argument. Now when we place their works side by side, decade by decade, new patterns emerge. And this is how I read it. Souza's birth and Raza's colleen, both wrestling with existential ground. One through flesh, one through earth. Souza's black paintings and Raza's structured geometry. Density versus order. Both trying to stabilize chaos. Souza's late portraits, Raza's luminous Bindu canvases. Two forms of searching. A psychological search, a metaphysical search. Their works never looked alike, but they feel like they belong in the same philosophical debate. Raza is not Souza's opposite, he's Souza's counterweight. Souza is not Raza's foil, he is Raza's dialectical partner. Together they produce a spectrum of Indian modernist thought. We have to revisit these histories because the old narratives are no longer adequate. We need to rewrite micro-histories through visual analysis, archival hermeneutics, comparative philosophy, and relational mapping. Because treating Souza as the bad boy and Raza as the sage takes away so much. Because Indian modernism is not a linear progression, but a set of parallel experiments driven by dialogues, critiques, and philosophical oppositions. Because these archives tell us that modernism was a network of relationships, not a catalogue of individual artists. Revisiting these histories allows us to see Indian modernism as an indigenous innovation. Souza as ideologue and interlocutor, Raza as intellectual partner and equal, the PAG as a dynamic ecology. Revisiting these histories is not revisionism, it is revelation. This research also has strong curatorial implications, offering a framework that can be directly translated into exhibition design, thematic structuring, and interpretive display. So what do we ultimately gain by reading Souza and Raza together? We gain a modernism that is alive, not static, not isolated, not Western in origin, but deeply Indian in its tension, its anxieties, its aspiration. We gain a Souza who is more than just a scandal maker, we gain a philosopher, a mentor, a friend, a fierce critic, an architect of artistic freedom. We also gain a Raza who is more than a mystic. We see a modernist deeply shaped by debate, by doubt, by conversations. And we gain an understanding of Indian modernism not as a style, but as a dialogue. Between Souza and Raza lies the living field of Indian modernism. All between chaos and cosmos, rupture and wholeness, body and spirit. Two trajectories, one conversation. Thank you.